Well, good morning, everybody. This is Barry Jones again with Standards Plus History Academy, and this is episode 4 in the Miami series. And we have been trying to establish the occupants of Miami, the people who are living in close proximity to one another that all have disparate motives, but common motives nonetheless, to want to get rid of Castro. And we started off with the militant Cubans. And one of the points that I made is most of them were military age men. And of course, these are refugees who have fled Cuba for their lives, but would like to go back and are going to their sole purpose in coming to Miami is to save their life and to organize somehow a counter revolution to overthrow Castro and or kill Castro. If they can get any help from the United States, that would be great, or any players here, private or otherwise. The second group of people in Miami that had another motive to want to get rid of Castro was the organized crime element led by Santos Trafficante, but including Johnny Rosselli and a whole raft of organized crime figures that simultaneously were Cuban. So they had two motives. They wanted to go back because they'd been expelled, or like Santos had fled for their life, just like the refugees. But the other reason has to do with money. They're part of an organized crime called Cosa Nostra, where Cuba had been $100 million enterprise for their businesses, plural, uh, during the days of Batista. And they uh, had been in business with the United States government, primarily the CIA, hoping to uh, also to smuggle heroin from the Far East through Cuba into the United States. They had a lot of lucrative businesses going there besides just the casinos and the hotels. So obviously they have a reason, a motive. And then the third group is the group that we're focusing on now, and that's the CIA people. And of course, the CIA would like nothing better than get rid of Castro, who has now become friendly with the Soviets. He's deemed a threat to national security, 90 miles off the coast of the United States. Bigger than that, though, a more uh, private motive is the heroin industry that that they had been that had been so lucrative for them and financed so many of their covert operations during the 50s. So and then you got Richard Nixon, and of course one of his best friends, B.B. Rebozo, one of these organized crime connected guys, lives in Miami and has helped Richard Nixon establish all kinds of investments in Cuba and in Miami as well. And while Nixon was vice president, he was in charge of the 5412 committee. He established the S Force to go into Cuba, get rid of Castro, to assassinate him. So he's beating a path back and forth between Washington, D.C. and Miami, meeting with B.B. Rebozo. Uh, he's sending people like his emissary, the director of security from CIA, Sheffield Edwards, down to meet with Santos and Sam Giancana and Johnny Rosselli and the rest of them to create this S force. And so you got a lot of moving parts, and Miami is the hub of all of this. Yesterday, or part 3 was CIA personnel. We got through most of them. Part 4 today is a continuation of that. There's 3 people in particular that we didn't get to in episode 3. It just made episode 3 too long. And those 3 are really important. David Morales, primarily, Jerry Patrick Hemming, and Bernardo de Torres. So those 3 CIA people we're going to talk about today that are also located in Miami. So this is a picture of David Morales, kind of a mysterious fellow. Uh, he was a Mexican American and had a nickname El Indio because of his features. He joined the United States Army right after World War II in 46 and pretty quickly got recruited into Army intelligence. And it was just like Ted Shackley had been. And it was during his time, and of course, that's where he met Ted Shackley. They're both a part of Army intelligence at the same time. And this relationship is going to carry forward between the two of them. Uh, we know Ted Shackley is going to end up being the future head of JM Wave out of Miami, leading all the Operation Mongoose operations against Cuba. And of course, William Harvey is also in intelligence during this period. He's going to be the future CIA head of ZR Rifle, also the head of Task Force W, also stationed at JM Wave under the leadership of Ted Shackley. But David Morales is like the third guy in the Three Little Pigs. You got Ted Shackley, William Harvey, and David Morales. So in 51, remember now the National Security Act was passed in 47, creating the CIA. 4 years later, Morales becomes a full-fledged employee of the CIA under cover of his Army intelligence position, but he was in the CIA. In 53, Morales assumed a cover as a State Department employee. We talked about these covers. It's like standard operating procedure. It's job number one for any CIA personnel involved in these covert operations to have a cover. I mean, from Lee Harvey Oswald to David Morales to Ted Shackley to William Harvey, they all had covers. And so his cover is State Department. We even talked about Chauncey Holt in his cover. Remember, he was supposedly working for the charity organization. Found out when he got into the charity organization in Washington that was really a CIA front. That was his cover. And a lot of times they have cover names, cover jobs, everything's cover for what they're really doing. Anyway, his job is working pretty closely with William Harvey in all the CIA black operations, including executive action. Of course, remember now, William Harvey was in charge of executive action, and then later he'd be in charge of ZR Rifle as well. And during the 50s, during this executive action stint, Morales became known as the CIA's top assassin in Latin America. And remember now, executive action, as distinguished from ZR Rifle, was on foreign targets using foreign mercenaries or criminals or people like David Morales who are undercover. In 61, Harvey transferred or arranged for Morales to be posted at JM Wave in Miami, and that's where he began serving as the operations chief for the CIA's covert operation, training and infiltrating teams into Cuba. Operation 40. All right, this is right on the cusp, right on that line of demarcation between Operation 40 transitions into Operation Mongoose, but it's all one long operation, same thing. And he is one of the trainers, and their job is, remember now, William Harvey was also in charge of Task Force W, so he had a vested interest in Morales being picked as one of his trainers because Task Force W was to use any and all methods at his disposal to overthrow Castro. So you can see the merging of these interests, and where David Morales earns this reputation as a top assassin early in his career. By 61, William Harvey, who's full go Operation Mongoose and Task Force W and executive action, is borrowing David Morales from executive action to post him at JM Wave to participate in Operation Mongoose, all the things under Task Force W. During this time, he reports directly to Ted Shackley. So it's the same three guys, just they kind of switch jobs sometimes. They use each other and they join each other's causes. And they're always the first phone call whenever somebody gets a new job, a new position, a new operation to lead. If it's Harvey, he's going to call Shackley and Morales. If it's Shackley, he's going to call Harvey and Morales. That's the way it goes. In 62 now, Morales joins Harvey with ZR Rifle. And that fulfills the creation document William Harvey drew up with Arnold Silver, which says this is an American target. We're going to use CIA operators, full-fledged CIA operators. The thinking in this, and this is speculation, but I've seen it in several source materials, is that this was too big a job to screw up, and we needed trained CIA operatives that in this field of expertise anyway, they are the best. And so David Morales joining ZR Rifle to assassinate an American target is not a surprise. He is the CIA's top assassin. And William Harvey knows it. So during this period of time, and of course, we established already that ZR Rifle was an operation to take out JFK. It started a month after Bay of Pigs, which is just a few months after he became president, and it ended 5 months after he died. And during that entire time, it had one target. And all of their documents talk about ZR Rifle. They talk about the target as a singular target, not plural. Executive action is always plural. So during this period, he works closely, and I think this is telling who ultimately, if you're going to start an investigation looking into the CIA's role in the assassination of JFK, you start with these people. And these are high-ranking people. All right, some of like Harvey obviously runs executive. In '62, he ran executive action, he ran ZR Rifle, he ran Task Force W, all out of Miami. Ted Shackley ran JM Wave out of Miami. You have David Atlee Phillips, who is chief of the Western Hemisphere. He is the CIA chief of the Western Hemisphere. He's essentially the number 2 guy behind Allen Dulles. And he's down in Mexico City, which is where, and his specialty is, ironically, disinformation or misinformation. His specialty is creating cover stories, fake stories to cover for operations. And isn't it interesting that one of the biggest, most important cover stories involving Lee Harvey Oswald, an incriminating cover story, trying to make him look slam dunk guilty to the American people, was the Mexico City story, coming right out of David Atlee Phillips' office. He was in charge of that. Of course, the story fell apart, but nonetheless, David Atlee Phillips put that story together. So he's working with Harvey, he's working with Phillips, he's working with Tracy Barnes, he's working with William Pauley. We talked about William Pauley in episode 3. He's working with Johnny Rosselli. Johnny Rosselli is the mob liaison. So here you see a connection. And John Martino is the Cuban, one of these militant Cubans that lives in Miami. So he's working with, essentially, the three-headed monster is contained in this list of names. You got CIA people, Harvey, Shackley, Phillips, Barnes, you got, and Pauley, you've got mob, Johnny Rosselli, and you've got Cubans, John Martino. And so, it's not hard to start. I compared it in episode 3 to braiding hair, and you get the 3 strands of hair, and they're all coming out of Miami. And you got the militant Cubans over here. That's that's strand of hair A. You got the strand of hair B over here. That's the mob. And in the middle, you got the CIA. And you start weaving them all together. At the end, you have one braid, but it's made up of 3 different elements of people. They all have their separate motives, but they all have motives nonetheless. And they're using each other to get the job done. And so why would it be any surprise that a CIA operator is working closely with a mob fella or a Cuban exile? Those are the 3 groups of people out of Miami working together to try to assassinate Castro. Of course, we all know later that'll turn and the target will become Kennedy instead. Now, this is a picture of Morales when he's a little older. In '63, witnesses allege Morales was involved in the JFK assassination. Now, this is 20 days after he and Eugene Braden were both arrested in Chicago in a similar plot. Of course, if you don't remember anything about that plot, it was upset. The whole apple cart got upset because an FBI informant named Lee called Chicago field office of the FBI and said there's a plot involving Cubans to kill the president in his motorcade. It was almost an identical plot to what happened 20 days later in Dallas. And there were 4 Cubans. They said they got 2 of them. 2 of them escaped. The 2 they got arrested were Eugene Braden and David Morales. Now, Eugene Braden was not Cuban, but he was instant amongst the Cubans. And he was known in the CIA circles anyway as David Morales' spotter. These assassins have spotters for these long-range shots. And Eugene Braden was almost always David Morales' spotter. So wherever you see Eugene Braden, you see Morales and vice versa in these types of operations. So when and in Chicago, indeed, they both got arrested together. The only reason we know this is because, they were released when the assassination didn't happen because the trip got canceled. The FBI quietly released Braden and Morales. They didn't have anything to hold them on because no shots had been taken. And they quiet released them without any reports or anything. But later, the whistleblower, Abraham Bolden, who was in the Secret Service, was in the office when they were interrogating Morales and Braden. He knew the names, and he released the names later when he was talking about the Secret Service's role in the JFK assassination. And anyway, uh, witnesses allege 20 days later that Morales was in Dallas. And we know Eugene Braden was in Dallas because he got arrested on Dealey Plaza. He was in the Daltex building and couldn't explain just to the officer's satisfaction why he was there. And they arrested him. There's an actual, Chauncey Holt saw it as he was being led. He was one of the three tramps being led into the records building to be interrogated. And as he was walking in, he recognized somebody who he worked with quite closely in the CIA. In fact, they shared an office space in LA. He recognized Eugene Braden being let out or released, and they sort of nodded at each other, and then they made contact later. He even knew where Eugene Braden was staying, the hotel he was staying at. That is strong indication that Morales was there. And of course, we know there was a shooter in the Daltex building, and there are other witnesses, including David Morales himself, later, who admits to being in Dallas in that day. So, because Eugene Braden was in the Daltex building, it's presumed that that's where Morales was set up to take a shot at the president. Probably did take a shot at the president. Uh, According to Tom Klein, CIA agent, quote, "We all admired the hell out of the guy," talking about Morales. "He drank like crazy, but he was bright as hell. He could fool people into thinking he was stupid by acting stupid." Kind of reminds me of that old show, that lawyer, I can't remember his name. Was it Matlock? It was Columbo. Columbo would, he'd act like he was the village idiot, and people would tell him things. Next thing you know, he's got him trapped on the stand, on the witness stand. He turns out to be the most brilliant man in there. Anyway, so he could fool people by thinking into thinking he was stupid by acting stupid, but he knew about cultural things all over the world. People were afraid of him. He was big, he was aggressive, he had this mystique about him. Stories about him permeated the agency. If the agency needed someone action oriented, he was at the top of the list. If the U.S. government, as a matter of policy, needed someone or something neutralized, meaning killed, Dave would do it, including things that were repugnant to a lot of people. I find it interesting. You know, these intelligence agencies, they're not that much different than any employment or HR firm that gives potential employees a psychological profile, right? They want to know who they're hiring, how they're wired, et cetera, et cetera. And guys like William Harvey and David Morales are involved in all things related to assassinations, executive action, ZR rifle. Morales confesses later to being in Dallas. We know his spotter was in Dallas. We know he was in Chicago. He he was known as the best assassin in Latin America. He got involved with William Harvey with ZR rifle and executive action because he was the best. And in addition to being technically the best, proficiently in his skill, he was also had that makeup that he would he would do jobs other people wouldn't do. He was fearless. That's why people were afraid of him. That's why he had that mystique. William Harvey had similar mystique about him. He liked Morales. He was loud and boisterous. He drank a lot. Isn't it interesting that these people that are action oriented, that's how Tom Kleins describes David Morales. William Harvey, that's how people describe him. They're big drinkers. They're loud. They're extroverts. They're larger than life personalities. I think that's interesting. But anyway, so this is David Morales talking later, and he's in a 1993 book. He's talking to his lawyer Robert Walton, who passed the story along to Gate Fonzie. If you remember, Gate Fonzie was that investigator for the House Select Committee in the late 70s. And he's really considered to be one of the finest investigators. The guy with who was just doggedly pursuing the truth about the JFK assassination that there ever was. Gate Fonzie. He wrote a book, and called The Last Investigation. And then Shane O'Sullivan, who worked for BBC and reported on this story, uh, was also a witness to this comment. Basically, Morales told his lawyers, quote, "I was in Dallas when we got that motherfucker, and I was in LA when we got the little bastard." Isn't it interesting? He used the same curse word to describe JFK as William Pauly did. Remember on the yacht, William Pauly, John Martino was ranting and raving, and they're waiting for the S Force to come back, and William Pauly tells John Martino, "Don't worry, John, we're going to kill that motherfucker." And he's talking about the S Force. And isn't it interesting that Morales years later uses the same pejorative term to describe JFK, and then admits to being in LA when we got the little bastard, who, of course, is Bobby Kennedy. And uh, we know Eugene Braden was in LA in '68. Isn't that interesting that Eugene Braden and David Morales were in Chicago? Both of them got arrested. That was the plot that didn't happen because of Lee, the informant, Lee Harvey Oswald. 20 days later, they're both in Dallas. And then 5 years later, they're both in LA. What else do you need to know? And of course, Morales is the CIA's top assassin. He's their man of action. And of course, during this period of time, he's operating out of Miami, out of JM Wave. This is the time period we're looking at, 60 to 63. In 1966, spinning it forward a few years, Ted Shackley was placed in charge of this is the 3 years after the assassination. He gets put in charge. Since JM Wave has been shut down, now he's in charge of the CIA secret war in Laos, which, if you remember back, JFK called that off when he first became president. So now that they got rid of JFK, the war's back on in Laos, and eventually it was spread into Vietnam and all the rest. And who's he recruit? His old buddy, David Morales, to participate in black operations, a base that he was in charge of, from which they would launch military operations against all those going up and down the Ho Chi Minh Trail, the Viet Cong, basically. In '69, 3 years after that, Morales transitions into Vietnam, as does Shackley. In '70, Morales was in Chile, and where he later told friends he personally eliminated several political figures there. So he's a mercenary in some sense, but he's the CIA's top assassin. So, like Tom Klein said, whenever there was somebody that they needed to get rid of, who needed to be neutralized, they sent David Morales. And his underboss throughout most of his career is Ted Shackley. They're sort of tied to him. It's a picture on the left of Shackley and on the right of David Morales there. Ruben Carbajal, who's a longtime friend of David Morales, said that in the spring of '73, Morales told him about his involvement with Bay of Pigs. And this is a picture here of Ruben. This is on the left is David Morales. On the right is Ruben Carbajal. And according to Carbajal, Morales told him, quote, Kennedy had been responsible for him having to watch all the men he recruited and trained get wiped out. Remember now, that was David Morales' job in Operation Mongoose. That's why Ted Shackley brought him in and William Harvey to train the people that were going to overthrow Castro. And Bay of Pigs was the first big operation. So they're his people. He said, I had to stand and watch all the men I recruited and trained get wiped out. And he added later in that same conversation, well, we took care of that son of a bitch, didn't we? Talk about JFK. In '74, a year later, Morales left the CIA, and Rubin wanted to know why you keep going back and forth to Washington, even though you're out of the CIA. And he just said, oh, kind of off the cuff, oh, they run into some problems. I have to go up there and take care of them. These people never let go of you. Not about the CIA. After he retired, Morales built a retirement. This is a picture, a pretty famous photo, David Morales in his older years. And he built a retirement villa near the Mexican border. Remember, he was from Mexico. And according to Robert Walton, if you remember Robert Walton came from my series about the Oswald handlers. He was the guy that assigned George de Montchalm the job of handling Lee Harvey Oswald. So, got a bug in here chasing me around. So anyway, this is the same Robert Walton, CIA guy, and Walton tells uh, how he came to visit David Morales at his new home. He said Morales had installed, quote, the best security system in the United States. And when he asked him, what do you get this great security system for? You're not, you're not running operations anymore. You're retired. He says, what do you need so much security for? You're still 30 miles from the Mexican border. Morales replied, quote, I'm not worried about those people. I'm worried about my own. So he wasn't worried about Mexican cartels or anybody getting him from Mexico where he might have created some enemies. He's worried about the CIA, the people he worked for, his employer. And I think that's a pretty relevant statement there, pretty important statement. During this period of time, David Morales had reason to be a little paranoid because a rash of his former associates started dying. Now, this is the late 70s when House Select Committee is doing their investigation. This is when Gate and Fonzie's going around rounding all these people up from Miami. He's worked himself into the network, and he's realized, A, we got these handlers like George DeMarcia. He shows up at George DeMarcia's door, inviting him to testify. That morning, that afternoon, George DeMarcia's dead of a gunshot, ruled a suicide. He finds out about the network of all these CIA people, and he shows up and he starts inviting, like, for example, Johnny Rosselli to testify. And this isn't CIA, this is the mob liaison, but he's in that same network. And of course, Johnny Rosselli did testify a couple times, but before he could go back and finish the job, he disappeared. And they ended up finding his body cut up into pieces, float in a oil drum floating in Dumbfounding Bay off the coast of Miami. So if you're David Morales, you know these people. You know Johnny Rosselli. He's turned up dead. You know Rip Robertson. Rip Robertson died in 1970, could not ever be interviewed. So that was handy for all the things he'd been involved in. But there was a lot of mystery about how he died. And of course, that was somebody Morales was intimately involved with because Rip Robertson was a trainer of the S-Force, the assassination team that David Morales was affiliated with. William Pauley, the guy who ran that yacht transporting the S-Force, had committed suicide in 1977. It was interesting, or ironically, right around the time he was asked to appear before the House Select Committee. So what David Morales is noticing is that the people that he's been in business with and that they've done all these dirty deeds with all his career, they're turning up dead. So at the same time, he's built this big mansion and he's got this state-of-the-art security system. And he tells, Robert Walton, he said, I'm not afraid of the Mexicans. I'm afraid of my own people. And you can see why he's afraid of his own people. And I included this part of the story because I think it's just a little bit more revelation about what happens to these people when their usefulness expires. In 78, now this is right in the thick of House Select Committee, he makes his last trip to Washington. He doesn't know it's going to be his last trip. Turns out to be his last trip. He meets Reuben Carbajal for a drink. Remember, they're longtime friends. And Carbajal noticed he didn't look good. He told him. He said, what's wrong? You don't look good. Morales replied, quote, I don't know what's wrong with me. Ever since I left Washington, I haven't been feeling very comfortable. That night, he gets rushed to the hospital. Carbajal goes to visit him the next morning. And according to Carbajal, they wouldn't let anybody in. And he says they had his room surrounded by sheriff's deputies. Later that day, he was taken off life support and he died. No autopsy was ever performed on Morales' body, and cause of death was natural causes, basically. Carbajal is convinced he was poisoned. And in Washington, which was probably the reason why they invited him to Washington for that last trip, so they get rid of him too. And that's what happened. That's the story of David Morales. But anyway, another one of these Miami operators, just thick as thieves with William Harvey and Ted Shackley, et cetera, et cetera. Jerry Patrick Hemming. There's some pictures here of Hemming. Also joined the Marine Corps in 54, became a sergeant, and was honorably discharged in 58. In 59, he's sort of a soldier of fortune. He went to Cuba to help Fidel Castro. And then and during that time in 59, he met Lee Harvey Oswald. If you remember, now 59, this is right before Lee Harvey Oswald leaves the Marines and goes to Russia. According to researchers, from 59 to 63, Hemming's travels almost mirrored those of Lee Harvey Oswald almost exactly. And there's a lot of smoke around the suggestion, or the suspicion anyway, that Hemming was working for the FBI, preparing a legend for Oswald, sort of a counter narrative or sheep dipping him. He's kind of like what all the doppelgangers were doing in Dallas in the weeks and months leading up to the assassination. So let's follow Jerry Patrick Hemming. It's interesting. He was in the Marine Corps about the same time Lee Harvey Oswald was. In 61, Hemming created an organization called Interpen, which was involved in training members of the anti-Castro groups. And this was all funded by the CIA. Interpen included. This is a picture of Hemming and all the Interpen associates. And some of these we've talked about, So these are the ones that are known associates of Interpen. And Interpen's training camp, this is just like what David Morales was doing. Remember, David Morales was hired by Harvey to train all these anti-Castro Cubans down in Miami, part of Operation Mongoose. Interpen is another such operation, and it's located near Miami. It was relocated in 62 to New Orleans, Lake Pontchartrain, after JFK began cracking down on the Florida camps. So in order to stay one step ahead of the executive branch, the Kennedy brothers, they moved it, Interpen, from Miami to New Orleans in 62. That's one reason. Another reason people suspect, or researchers suspect, is because he's following Oswald. By the time we get to 63, Oswald was spending the summer in New Orleans. And there's all kinds of evidence of Oswald accompanying David Ferry to these training camps on Lake Pontchartrain, one of which was Jerry Patrick Henry's Interpen camp. Hemming closed the Lake Pontchartrain North Training Camp in 64. Once it was no longer necessary, you could make a case, well, it was no longer necessary because, Kennedy's dead and the new president has no interest in trying to overthrow Castro. Johnson, LBJ. And you could also make the case that Lee Harvey Oswald is dead. There's no more, if indeed Jerry Patrick Hemming was involved in the sheep dipping, creating this legend for Lee Harvey Oswald, this incriminating legend that would be released in the form of a cover story after he was arrested. There's no need for him to be in New Orleans anymore because Oswald's not in New Orleans. In fact, Oswald's not even alive anymore. He's dead and gone. By 64, the Warren Commission's already preparing to release the report that pins the entire blame of the assassination of Lee Harvey Oswald. In other words, his mission was accomplished. So that's the story of Jerry Patrick Hemming. The next one is Bernardo de Torres. Interestingly, he's one of these Cuban refugees moved to the U.S. from Cuba in 55, and he worked as a private investigator in Miami, of course. And in 59, he became a strong opponent of Fidel Castro, served in Bay of Pigs. He was chief of intelligence for Brigade 2506. And who did he work under? He worked under David Morales. He got captured during the invasion and was held in captivity. Remember, there was this negotiation that took place. If you didn't get killed in the initial invasion, Castro captured all these Bay of Pigs guys and held them as became a leverage instrument, a negotiating chip that Castro had to get food, medicine, and money out of Kennedy in exchange for a hostage release or a POW release, whatever you want to call him. So during this time, he was held captive by Castro until December 24th, the day before Christmas in 1962, after which he returned to Miami. Now, remember now, 5 days later, 29th, Kennedy comes down to Miami and gives that speech to the Orange Bowl in front of all these returned brigadier members and all these Cuban exiles, 35,000 of them sitting in the stands, promising that he's not giving up on his efforts to get rid of Castro, promising he's going to double down, promising that this flag, this Cuban brigade flag, would one day fly over a free Havana. In fact, he even put a timetable on it. He says, before I leave office after my second term. So he's making these promises. Meanwhile, privately, he's promised Khrushchev, we're not going to fool around in Cuba anymore. So he's making promises he can't keep. This is all happening about the same time. In 1963, Torres worked with FBI Special Agent Charles Siragusa, specializing in, oh boy, assassinations, foreign assassinations. He also helped with Hemming's Interpen operation, training anti-Castro Cuban exiles for CIA-sponsored raids against Castro Cuba. So, again, I think this is the main point that comes out of all this. These people, it's very incestuous. All these people are involved in the same stuff. These guys that are specialists in assassinations are working for each other. These guys that are specialists in training, these Cuban exiles, are working for each other. They swap agencies and organizations, but they're generally speaking, they're all working towards the same goal, which is to overthrow Castro. And as long as our government is supporting that effort, they support our government, they work with our government. At such point, our government, parts of our government split off and decide not to go after Castro anymore. They feel betrayed. All these groups of people feel betrayed. And of course, it's not all of the government that wants to make peace with Castro. The CIA is still hell-bent on overthrowing Castro. So these people are still working with the CIA. It's mainly the executive branch. It's mainly JFK and his brother Bobby, who, after the Cuban Missile Crisis, are so scarred by how close we came to nuclear war. Now their efforts are to make peace. And that becomes the problem. Okay? Because these folks are not after peace. They're not into recognizing Castro's government. They're not into détente with Castro and the revolutionaries. According to House Select Committee investigator Gaten Fonzie, quote, Torres was among a group of 10 Cubans who helped Secret Servicemen protect President Kennedy when he visited Miami 4 days before his assassination. Okay, this is an unbelievable story. This is unbelievable. This helps. I wish I'd known all of this when I did my Secret Service series talking about stripping, security stripping, and infiltration. And I wish I'd known this name. I knew this was happening. I didn't know this name. I do now. Bernardo de Torres was one of 10 Cubans who helped Secret Servicemen protect President Kennedy 4 days before his assassination. And we know, but 4 days before his assassination, they had already tried to kill him 16 days prior in Chicago. The Cubans have already turned against JFK. And yet, the Secret Service allows these folks that hate Kennedy and already tried to kill him are now stalking him around the country. They're following him from Chicago down to Miami. They're going to follow him to Tampa. They're going to follow him to Palm Beach. And they're going to eventually get him in Dallas. And they infiltrate the Secret Service protective detail of JFK with 10 of these JFK-hating Cubans, including Bernardo de Torres. This is how the Secret Service participates in these assassination plots. They don't fire the gun. They just change the protection detail in such a way they replace the experienced people with inexperienced people, or they infiltrate the detail with people like these 10 Cubans. If you go back and look what happened this last summer in the assassination attempt against Trump, that's exactly what happened. They stripped away his security and replaced it with these rent-a-cops, these people that were with Homeland, some of them were with Homeland Security, some were with DHS, some of them were secrets. None of them were Secret Service. Some of them were locals, And that's why it was a total clusterfuck in Butler, Pennsylvania. And if it had succeeded, it would have been the exact same thing that happened uh, here, where and in Dallas, 4 days after Miami, it's their standard operating procedure. You want the Secret Service to protect the protectee, they're going to have their best and the brightest doing it. If you want the Secret Service to pretend like they're protecting, but really they're compromising the security and the safety, they will infiltrate the detail with unqualified, uh, inexperienced, uh, maybe even compromised people like these 10 Cubans. And then it appears to John Q. Public that they were still doing their job because they're in suits and they're escorting the car. It looks like they're all there, but the security's been hollowed out. It's been completely hollowed out, and that the protectee has no idea is being led along like a sheep to the slaughter. Fonzie's claim was later corroborated by Jerry Patrick Hemming, the guy we just talked about, who says he was also involved in that security infiltration effort. So here are two prominent names, according to Gate and Fonzie, in the JFK assassination, Bernardo de Torres and Jerry Patrick Henry, both involved in the assassination of JFK, who 4 days prior were in his security detail in Miami, where they were trying to. Now, they didn't get him. And the only reason they didn't get him is because they changed all the details at the last minute. He was supposed to come in, motorcade to the city, just like Dallas. Instead, he flew in on a helicopter and flew out. Gave his speech real quick and flew out. He was only there a few hours. And so the whole thing got turned upside down backwards. But if it had gone off as planned, JFK would have been killed in Miami. According to Miami police, de Torres was an associate of Anselmo Leon Allegrio, who was an associate of Jerry Patrick Hemming, okay, which this is another corroboration that Jerry Patrick Hemming and Bernardo de Torres worked together, not just in the security infiltration effort, but they were associates, according to Miami police. According to Miami police, they once found explosives and weapons in Allegrio's home, and Allegrio said, well, they belonged to de Torres. And so this is just corroboration that these two had worked together. According to Tom Bethel, who worked for New Orleans District Attorney Jim Garrison, interviewed Hemming during his investigation in the late 60s, asking about Interpen. Hemming claimed, quote, in 1963, there were numerous teams with paramilitary inclinations out to get Kennedy. So what Hemming is confirming to Garrison is there should have never been 10 Cubans helping Secret Service protect JFK in Miami, because by that time, all the Cubans basically had flipped the switch because JFK had betrayed them. And they had formed, just like they had numerous teams to get Castro. Now these numerous teams had changed targets and they were after JFK. According to Bethel, these groups were financed by wealthy entrepreneurs of the H.L. Hunt type, these oil guys out of Texas. And this is where the LBJ connection comes in. These are his people. It's financed his career this entire time. Picture H.L. Hunt there. So, my goodness, you start, what an interesting story, and relevant too, because the same thing just happened this last summer. This is the Secret Service method. And that's why they fight so hard to protect documents and not get them released or declassified, because the methods and sources. They've used this same method to contaminate Secret Service protection. Every time they have someone they want to assassinate, this is how they do it. They infiltrate, they compromise the security detail. It appears the security is the same, but it's not. By the way, we got an inside view of this from Abraham Bolton, who was a Secret Service agent. One other thing about the Secret Service, there were three Secret Service agents who were honest brokers in all this. And something bad happened, all three of them. You know, one of them was the driver, the regular driver. He got killed off a month before the motorcade, so they could replace him with a compromised driver. Another one was an agent who was based in Miami or in Dallas, who got wind of the plot and ran out and tried to warn him. He disappeared completely. To this day, nobody knows what happened to him. But his family continued to get paychecks mailed to their mailbox. But he just disappeared off the face of the earth. Of course, we know he got killed. We don't know how or who did it, but they dragged him off the street and he just disappeared. And the third one was Abraham Bolton, who told the story afterwards, and they put him in a mental hospital. and trumped up some charges against him, threw him in jail. And to my knowledge, he's still alive. Now, he's been released. He was pardoned by Joe Biden, but he uh, he was the first black agent in White House security detail, and he was brought in by JFK. He was loyal to JFK, and he told the story of what was going on. So it's not like we don't have inside information or that the entire Secret Service was compromised. It didn't have to be compromised. You just had to get the few at the top, and then they pull all the strings, replace the honest brokers with dishonest ones, and bingo, there you go. Bernardo de Torres is also involved in the famous Silvia Odio story. This is a picture of Bernardo de Torres, the taller one at the top left, and Silvia Odio is pictured at the bottom. She lived in Dallas. In '63, she lived in Dallas, on the outskirts, a little apartment there. And she was Cuban, and she was a member of the anti-Castro group Junta Revolucionaria Cubana, nicknamed JUR. And her after the assassination, Odio told the FBI she saw a picture of Lee Harvey Oswald on the news, and she went to the FBI. She said that on September 25, approximately 2 months before the assassination, she received a visit from three men who claimed they were from New Orleans. They knocked on her door and they stood on her stoop there. Two of the men introduced themselves as Leopoldo and Angel, and they were both Cubans. And they claimed to her that the reason we're here, the reason of our visit, is because we're also members of JUR. And so they're presenting themselves as common, we're in this cause together, and we're here to introduce ourselves. By the way, if you know the story of Richard Case Nagel, this corroborates this existence of Leopoldo and Angel, because Richard Case Nagel was a double agent for the CIA. He worked for the CIA, but he also worked for the Soviets, and he was a double agent. That's what he was for the CIA. And in that capacity, when he was working for the Soviets, his job was to follow Lee Harvey Oswald around. And in following Lee Harvey Oswald around New Orleans that summer of '63, he said Lee Harvey Oswald was around two Latin, he called them Latins, but they were Cubans, named Leopoldo and Angel constantly. And he reported back to the Soviets that Leopoldo and Angel were Alpha 66 members that were setting Lee Harvey Oswald up to be the fall guy in the upcoming assassination of JFK. Well, when Richard Case Nagel told the KGB that, they were very alarmed because they said they're setting him up because he's been to Russia, and that is a false flag to blame Russia. And so they told Richard Case Nagel, it's getting off track a little bit, but they told Richard Case Nagel, you got to tell Lee Harvey Oswald what Leopoldo and Angel are up to. They're setting him up. He's going to be the fall guy. And if he doesn't believe you, you got to kill him, because we can't have this assassination happen and have it being blamed on somebody who's been to Russia, ostensibly taking orders from Russians and doing the bidding of the Russians. It'll turn into a nuclear war between the Americans and the Russians. So they ordered Richard Case Nagel to kill Lee Harvey Oswald. He didn't believe him. So he has this conversation, and he'd become friends with Oswald. They were both in the CIA. So he told Oswald. Oswald didn't believe him. So, of course, Nagel's orders now, KGB, to kill him, but he can't murder another CIA agent. On the other hand, he can't allow it to happen. That's treason. So he's between a rock and a hard place. If he does nothing, he commits treason because the president's going to get killed. If he kills Oswald to prevent it, he commits murder. See, he goes in, as that famous story, he goes into an El Paso bank, shoots up the bank, goes out, sits in his car, waits to be arrested. When they ask him, what'd you do that for? Who are you? Why'd you do that? He says, I'd rather be in jail for burglary than be arrested or for treason or for murder. And they didn't understand what he's talking about. There's a book out, tells the whole story, Richard Case Nagel's story. And there's more to that story, by the way, about Richard Case Nagel and the fact that he informed the KGB that Lee Harvey Oswald was being set up. That's how the Soviets knew when they got that letter that Ruth Payne said she found, typed. Remember, Lee Harvey Oswald never typed anything. He handwrote everything. This typed letter was sent to the Soviet embassy claiming it was from Lee Harvey Oswald with all these incriminating details about how he's meeting with Kostakov and how he's trying to get visas to flee afterwards to go to Russia or Cuba after the assassination. This was all going to be released by the FBI because they read the mail that went into the Soviet embassy. And this was all part of a setup. But the KGB foiled it because of Richard Casnego. And what they knew from Richard Casnego was that Lee Harvey Oswald was the patsy. And so they informed the FBI, the U.S. government. They released the letter, sent it back, said, we reject this. This is a fabrication. We know what you're doing. Basically called CIA's bluff on this, the FBI's bluff on this, and ruined a pretty elaborate plot to set up Oswald involving Ruth Paine, his handler in Dallas, involving the FBI and the CIA and this fake letter. It was the only reason it didn't work is because Richard Casnego gave information to the Soviets prior, and it all goes back to these two guys, Leopoldo and Angel. Well, here they are again. Now they're meeting Silvia Odio on her doorstep. Same two guys. So we know they exist. The third man that was with them was a gringo. That's what they called him. And they identified him as, quote, Leon Oswald. And they told Silvia Odio, this guy's an American sympathizer who was willing to take part in the assassination of Castro. In other words, he's not one of us, but he is. And they were asking her for either money or help. And she said, I'm not willing to get involved in any criminal activity. And so they left. And the next day, and of course, Odio is talking to the FBI after the assassination because one of the three was, in her mind, Leopoldo and Angel were incidental in this whole thing. The thing that mattered was the fact that this guy named Leon Oswald was standing on her doorstep 2 months before the assassination. So she's trying to cooperate with the FBI. The following day, she says, so on the 26th, Leopoldo calls her back on the phone. Interesting how he knew her phone number. Anyway, he called her on the phone and he says some of this really crazy stuff. This is what you start to see in Dallas leading up to the assassination. All of these people with these wildly public incriminating details about Lee Harvey Oswald. And many times it's these almost every time it's a doppelganger. It's not the real Lee Harvey Oswald. Anyway, he's telling her on the phone it was his idea to introduce the American into their organization, Jure, because he is, quote, great. He is kind of nuts. He said that Oswald had been in the U.S. Marine Corps, was an excellent shot, and that the American had said that, quote, the Cubans don't have any guts because President Kennedy should have been assassinated after the Bay of Pigs, and some Cubans should have done that because he was the one that was holding the freedom of Cuba, actually. So here is this guy seeding into Silvia Odio's consciousness so that on the event, JFK is assassinated and everyone, and the cover story is released incriminating Lee Harvey Oswald, she's going to recognize the photo and she's going to go to the FBI and tell them everything that he told her on the phone, and it's going to be released to the American public that this guy 2 months prior was standing on her doorstep talking about how he hates JFK. He's talking about how he had said JFK should have been assassinated after Bay of Pigs, calling the Cubans cowards, telling her that he was in the U.S. Marine Corps and was an excellent shot. He was trained. All the things that became part of the narrative. And of course, we know now that Lee Harvey Oswald could not have been the man standing on her doorstep because he was, according to the Warren Commission's own report, on a bus or headed to Mexico City at the same time. So here we have another instance where we have doppelgangers stepping on top of doppelgangers of Lee Harvey Oswald's where he was actually at, documented where he was actually at, and causing a duplication effect where any trial attorney, half competent trial attorney is going to be able to put this in a timeline and show clearly how it couldn't have been him. It was one of these doppelgangers intending to incriminate Lee Harvey Oswald, and it was intended to come out after. But the important to today's story is the presence of Leopoldo and Angel. According to Silvia Odio story, JFK researcher Joan Mellon, pictured here, she's carried out a lot of research into this Odio story. Bernardo de Torres was the Leopoldo on that front stoop. It was Bernardo de Torres who was with Angel. There's a lot of question about who Angel was. Okay. I've heard a lot of different things about Angel, but we're not talking about Angel today. Leopoldo was Bernardo de Torres. So he was involved, just like the suspicion was that Jerry Patrick Henning was involved in creating a narrative, a suspicious and incriminating narrative about Lee Harvey Oswald in New Orleans. Bernardo de Torres picked up and was doing this in Dallas in a CIA effort to frame Oswald. And of course, he claims to be Leopoldo on Silvia Odio's front steps. And he's standing there with a Lee Harvey Oswald doppelganger. This is 2 months before the assassination. So, same guy. This same guy came from Miami. According to Bernardo de Torres' own daughter, after the JFK assassination, he was actually, here's another infiltration. He was actually employed by the CIA to investigate JFK's death. So one of the perpetrators, one of the conspirators, one of the guys involved in the setup of Oswald was employed by the CIA to investigate JFK's death. Just like when he and Jerry Patrick Henning infiltrated Miami security secret service to protect JFK. Here they are infiltrating or being seeded into the CIA's own investigation into JFK's death. She said, quote, yes, he worked for several years with the CIA at uncovering all the possible people that were on its hit list. I misspelled that. He was actually in Florida with my stepmother at the time of the assassination and was working on his other job as military coordinator for Brigade 2506. It's located in Miami, in Little Havana. I think he came to a conclusion in his investigation and thinks he knows who were the people who killed JFK, but doesn't like or want to deal with what he found because all of a sudden he stopped researching and never spoke about it again. Normally, he doesn't stop until he's found the answers. So this guy was in on it from beginning to end, even after JFK's death. In 66, 3 years later, de Torres was used as an infiltrator again, this time to infiltrate Jim Garrison's New Orleans investigation. He shows up one day. According to Garrison, a veteran of the Bay of Pigs, de Torres showed up early. This is in his book. De Torres showed up early in the probe, saying he was a private detective from Miami who wanted to help, and dropping the name of my friend, Miami DA Richard Gerstein, as an opener. In retrospect, every lead de Torres developed ended up being in a box canyon, which is legalese for a lost cause. It was just a wild goose chase. And we learned later that de Torres was forwarding his reports on his investigation to the Miami CIA station. So this guy is a master of infiltration, infiltrating the Miami Secret Service 4 days before JFK was assassinated, infiltrating, being part of the frame up of Oswald in advance, and also, according to Richard Case Nagel, spending his time in New Orleans trying to set up Oswald. And Richard Case Nagel said it was so obvious I could see it. He reported it to the Soviets. And he continues that in Dallas with the doppelganger on Silvia Odio's desk or front doorstep. And here he is in 66 being used by the CIA again to infiltrate Jim Garrison's investigation. After, in 64, he was part of CIA infiltration to investigate the JFK assassination. So, I mean, this guy, wherever he shows up, he is an infiltrator. And he's from Miami. He's operating out of Miami, according to his own daughter. Eventually, in this case, Garrison became suspicious of Torres, and he told his staff, quote, under no circumstances offer any information to him. He even wrote at the top of one of Torres' memos, quote, his reliability is not established. Garrison was convinced that Torres was working for JM Wave, all right, the CIA station in Miami, and indeed, declassified documents now show that de Torres gave the CIA's final report on Jim Garrison on March 2, 1967. We didn't know it at the time. Garrison didn't know it. And it took years to find out through the release of documents. But the CIA had a special, quote, Garrison squad whose only job was to infiltrate Garrison's DA's office in New Orleans and infiltrate. It's what we call rat fucking. Rat fucking is that intelligence term, which means you get in and you screw it up from within. You just tear it all apart from within. And he was a rat fucker. That's what Bernardo de Torres was, over and over and over again. He was especially adept at getting inside investigations into JFK's assassination, whether from the CIA's perspective or Jim Garrison's perspective, getting in Secret Service's secret security detail. I mean, my God, the guy was like a chameleon. And according to Larry Hancock, pretty prominent JFK researcher, quote, it certainly appears that de Torres' role in the Garrison investigation is suspicious. It supports the House Select Committee conclusion that de Torres had penetrated Garrison's investigation. Also shows that de Torres had an agenda of his own, in addition to getting intelligence about Garrison's investigation and investigators. That agenda involved, once again, shifting attention to Fidel Castro and a Cuban hit team, rather than the activities of the Cuban exiles. Again, false flag. This is what the CIA, that their goal in Operation Northwoods, the CIA and the Pentagon, when they went to JFK, presented to him Operation Northwoods, it was all about, it was a false flag designed, a terrorist attack on an American target, on American soil, that could be blamed on Cuba and would generate enough anger and hostility from American people and desire for revenge to justify a war against Cuba. Is there a more prominent American target than the President of the United States, killed on American soil in Dallas, Texas, blamed on a Cuban, a pro-Castro Cuban operator, Lee Harvey Oswald, and continuing the effort after his assassination and after the initial Warren Commission report, even up to and including the Garrison trial in the late 60s and House Select Committee investigation in the late 70s, to continue to try to infiltrate these investigations and produce more false flags that always point the finger at Castro. They never gave up on this effort. It was one false flag, a long false flag operation is what it was. Okay, so we've now completed the part of the Miami series that talks about the players and who's there in Miami, where all the pot of stew that is one ingredient after another gets thrown into this pot of stew. They all join hands in causes in a united effort to get rid of Castro. It's the Cubans, it's the mob, it's the CIA, and are all in close proximity, working together. And I hope I've demonstrated that adequately and not confused anybody. But those are the players. Those are the three conspirators that you got the CIA calling the shots, paying the bills, but you got in partnership with the mob, whom they need, right? Because the mob has the foot soldiers, the Cubans. So they're working together as kind of like an unholy trinity, the Father, Son, the Holy Ghost, right? They're three separate, but they're really one. And so, again, I think this is a really important point. You can't separate the Cubans from the CIA, the mob from the CIA. You can't separate the Cubans from the mob. You can't separate the mob from the CIA. They're all together. It's one homogenized mess, all going after Castro. And as long as they're going after Castro, an argument can be made that they're being patriotic and they have their own motives. But an argument can be made that their cause is justified. It's when JFK calls off all of this and betrays the cause that he becomes the enemy and they switch targets. And the reason why in the post-assassination investigations, they cannot allow an investigation of the anti-Castro efforts is because the anti-Castro efforts led by the anti-Castro people are the same people that killed Kennedy. And if you investigate a small part of it, it's impossible to tie it off and not see their importance to the JFK conspiracy or their contributions or their involvement. So you just can't have any investigation of the anti-Castro effort at all. So you have to tie off any connection to the mob. You have to tie off any connections to the anti-Castro Cubans. You have to tie off any connections to the CIA. And you got to instead blame shift everything to the patsy that you've laid a trail of incriminating evidence toward. And then, of course, he killed him off before he could speak for his own defense. And now all efforts are to blame him for everything. And of course, he's got to be a lone nut. He can't be connected to any of the three either. Of course, which he is. He's connected to all three of those. But he's got to be this lone nut who just, for his own reasons that we'll never know, never understand, he killed the president. And then another lone nut comes along, kills him, right? He can't be connected to the mob, even though Jack Ruby is mobbed. He can't be connected to the Cubans, even though he went down and saved Santos Trafficante's life. He supported Fidel Castro and Batista. He can't be connected to the CIA. He can't. He's got to be. This is why they always characterize these people as lone nuts, because they can't have any linkages that go back that to agencies or people that represent agencies or connected to agencies, because that would betray the conspiracy. All right. That is episode 4. Moving on, I think I mentioned there were 12 episodes in this Miami series. So it's a pretty lengthy series. And I'm trying to just, in detail, in this series, try to explain just how important Miami was to the plot to kill JFK. I think Miami's number 1, New Orleans is number 2, and Dallas is incidental. Could have happened in Chicago, almost did. Could have happened in Miami, almost did. Could have happened in Tampa, almost did. Could have happened in Washington, D.C. If you know the Richard Case Nagel story, that was where it was supposed to happen originally. It just happened to happen in Dallas. Okay, thank you. God bless. Have a great weekend.